good evening to you. My name is Matthew. I'm the pastor at Mount Seal Pentecostal Church, and I want to welcome you to our online Bible study on Tuesday night. Normally on Tuesday nights we have our Bible study at the church building, but as we've mentioned before, we are currently having to do this online due to our restrictions. As part of our Bible study, if this is your first time tonight, we have a thought to think about, a question to ponder, and a text to study. If you have any questions, any queries about anything that I've spoken about tonight, please drop me a comment in the info box at the bottom of the webpage, or drop me an email at info@mpconline.org, and I'll endeavour to answer your question as best as I can. Well, if you've been following our Bible study for the last few weeks, you'll notice that we've been doing a series of studies on effective keys to prayer. We've looked at the importance of praying according to God's will, praying with faith, the importance of obedience, the importance of earnestness, being persistent in our prayer, forgiving others, and receiving forgiveness. These are all key aspects of actually being effective in our prayer life. But tonight, what I want to speak tonight to you about is the importance of waiting on the Lord. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that life at the minute can be very hectic, and it just never seems to stop. And if there's anything good or positive out of this coronavirus pandemic, I think it may have teaches us to slow down a bit more. But overall, life can be a bit chaotic. And sometimes if you take food and you try to rush food, you're going to get yourself indigestion. It's not going to help. You're not going to be able to digest your food properly. And sometimes we can have a similar approach when it comes to our relationships. If we just take a cursory few minutes to say hello to someone, or we just engage in small talk but never really take the time to building relationships, to getting to know each other, our relationships are going to be very shallow and lack anything of any significance and meaning. And sometimes because of the rush and the hectic pace of life, we could almost take the same attitude when it comes to prayer with God, that almost our prayer to God is a bit like something that we do in a tick list for the day. Well, I think we can all agree that we wouldn't have that same attitude with our spouse or a loved one or our family members or children or parents. In fact, if we just saw them as an item on our list to do that day. And why should we take the same approach when it comes to prayer and developing and growing a relationship with God? And so I want us to look at the importance of waiting on the Lord in prayer, because when we wait on God, it's teaching us to listen to God's voice, not just to rush our requests, but actually take time to hear what God has to say. I want to read to you a few verses from the book of Psalms, Psalm 130, verses 5 to 6. And it reads this: I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning, more than watchmen wait for the morning. You know, the idea behind this word wait is the idea of waiting with a sense of eager anticipation. It combines the idea of time and hope, that we wait for something that we hope for. And in our relationship with God, we come before God, we present our requests, and then we wait on God in a sense of anticipation as to what answer he is going to bring to our lives. But I also think I want to illustrate this point of waiting on the Lord just from an example of our human interactions. Imagine for a moment I wanted to invite you out for a meal. And initially I was to invite you. My request was very vague. I said, hey, good to see you. Hey, we know what? We must go out for a meal sometime. Now, what does that mean? How do you respond to that? I haven't given you a time. I haven't given you a date or a location to meet. And so it's very vague, it's very vacuous, it doesn't really mean anything. How many times have you met with people and someone say, hey, we must go out for a coffee? And what does that mean? It never happens unless it's actually specifically in the diary. And sometimes our prayers can be like that with God. We can come before God and we can just make very vague prayers. Prayers like, "Dear Lord, please bless Grandma, Granddad, and all the missionaries in the world." There's nothing wrong in that prayer, but the vagueness of that prayer means that how would you know when God has responded in answer to that prayer? And so when we interact in our relationships, we try to avoid being vague in our requests. On the other hand, it might be that I could be specific in what I'm asking of you, but I'm very hurried and impersonal. So I might say to you, "Hey, why don't you come round my place for a meal, 6 o'clock on Friday?" And then before I give you a moment to respond, I've just walked off. Okay, you probably just have a very puzzled and confused look in your face, thinking, "What was that all about? What does that mean?" And in a similar way, we can also make similar prayer requests to God. Sometimes we can think that almost the very act of bringing a request to God, and in a way that is not heartfelt, means that somehow that God is going to answer and respond to our request. But we forget something, don't we? That prayer isn't like a vending machine that you put your 10p coin in and you hope to get something out. No, prayer is a relationship with God, and we should not treat God like a vending machine. So if we shouldn't be vague or hurried in our prayer requests. There is a third way that we can pray, where our request is heartfelt, personal, and specific. So on this occasion, imagine I was to come to you and say to you, "Hey, I'd love you to come round my place Friday night at 6 o'clock and have a nice meal." And I look you in the eye and I wait till I get your full attention. And then after I've made my response and given my request to you, I then continue to look you in the eye and await a response from you in the anticipation and the hope that hopefully you will accept that request. I would say that in that sort of situation, you would know from my personal, my facial expression, my tone of voice, my tone, my timing, and the setting that I made the request to you, that I'm giving you my full self, that I'm presenting you my full self to you as a person in the hope that I will get an answer and a request from you. You see, I would say that this third approach is the right approach when it comes to our relationship with God in prayer. That we don't rush our prayers, we are not impersonal in our prayers, we're not vague in our prayers, but we come before God with specific requests, things that are on our heart that we come before God, we bring them before God, and we wait on God's presence. We give the whole of our person before the Lord. As the psalmist said, that he says, "My whole being waits on the Lord." We wait on God with our whole being, giving him our full attention. And in that place, I believe that we can receive an answer where God gives us an assurance of his answer in our life. It's not that there's not a place for vague prayers. Sometimes we don't have the specifics to know how to pray into a situation, and so we need to pray vaguely. It's not that sometimes we don't pray rush prayers. Sometimes because life is chaotic, we can pray short, heartfelt prayers at given moments. I think, for example, of a soldier on a battlefield. He may just need to make a short prayer in the midst of conflict. But the truth is that to develop a meaningful relationship with God, we need to know how to wait on God. We need to know how to give our full selves to God in prayer and wait for his response. I often find that when we take this approach to prayer, God can and does change our circumstances. But more often than not, I find that when we wait on God in prayer, that God actually changes us and transforms us and helps us become better people, more like Jesus. And so I want to encourage you in your prayer life to wait on the Lord. Don't rush your prayers. Don't treat it as a to-do list. Don't allow your prayers to become vague or impersonal, but give your whole person and your whole self to God in those moments of prayer. Well, that's the thought to ponder. What about a question to think about? Well, the question I want you to think about is this. Does waiting on the Lord come easy to you, or do you get easily distracted? And if not, what do you need to do? So does waiting on the Lord come easy to you, or do you get easily distracted? And if not, what do you need to do? And the text of study, I want you to look at Psalm 130 verses 5 to 6. And I want you to answer these questions. What do you think it means to wait on the Lord with your whole being? And how can you cultivate this in your prayer life? Thank you for listening to our online Bible study. Don't forget, we actually have a prayer meeting after this at 7:30. If you want to be involved in that prayer meeting, drop me an email at info@mpconline.org and I'll send you the information for that. God bless you, and hope to see you later on. God bless. Bye.